Strategy Forum. Today's guest knows exactly what it takes to turn a group of individuals into a team and what actually works in every sense of the word. So, Alison Coward is the founder of Bracket, where she helps teams find their rhythm. Because, as you'll hear today, high performance isn't about just doing more, it's about doing the right things and doing them better together overall. So, with over 2 decades of experience in creating creative teams, Alison blends strategy, facilitation, and coaching to help leaders build collaborative cultures where the results and relationships go hand in hand. She's the author of Workshop Culture, a practical guide for leaders who want to create teams that don't just meet deadlines, but they thrive while doing it. So, if you've ever wondered how to get your team aligned, engaged, and in sync without burning them out, this is a conversation for you. So, please welcome Alison Coward to the People Strategy Forum. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Yes, and I think that the thing that I often say, and when we're starting these conversations, is people really want to get to know you. They would like to know how you started in this great work that you're doing today and how you help your clients. And so, if you kind of rewind the clock a little bit, what really got you interested in culture and teams?
Yeah, so it started from the beginning of my career, really. Even though I started working in a completely different sector, I've always been interested in creativity and collaboration. Just sort of fast forward in the first few years of my career, I ended up doing an MA. I was working with creative practitioners, artists and designers, and I did an MA to find out a little bit more about how they run their businesses more effectively. And a lot of the research that I was doing at the beginning of my MA pointed to this idea of collaboration and how collaboration was so important for independent creative businesses to grow and thrive. So when I finished my MA, I had this idea for a business which was about bringing creatives together into collaborative projects. And when I did that, because I was more of the sort of organizer, project manager, I would almost take a back seat, bring creatives together and run brainstorming sessions with them so that they could, meet and generate ideas and put their projects into action, put their ideas into action through projects. And what was interesting to me is I didn't think that I was actually doing anything that important, but people would point to me and say, that thing that you're doing, you're bringing creators together and you're helping them sort of, move forward. That's really interesting. Can you come and do that for my team? And so that's when I fell on this idea of facilitation and realized that facilitation was this really valuable skill that supports collaboration, brings people together, helps to generate great ideas and helps to move projects forward. And so I guess the long story short is that I started doing this for teams within organizations, realizing how much it was needed within organizations, not only in a one-off workshop format, such as an away day or a brainstorming session, but in the long term. Over time, this is how teams needed to work, really. Team culture needs to be collaborative. We need to encourage creativity. We need to bring everyone's talents together to kind of create things that they couldn't do on their own. And facilitation was part of that. And that's kind of my journey in a very sort of brief explanation.
And so that's fascinating. And so let's just dive into a particular topic. I mean, you're talking about creatives, and I get the gist of it. But can you define, when you talk about creatives? I mean, there are certain types of talented individuals.
Yeah, so I mean, early in my career, I was working with what I guess we would call like the pure definition of a creative, i.e. artists, people that were creating things with their hands, like ceramics, textiles and, furniture. And so it was, people that were creating objects, portraits and all those kinds of things. Now, when I work with that sort of area of creativity, it's much broader, right? Because, we don't necessarily need to be producing things in order to be creative. We need creativity in business. We need new ideas. We need new ideas for products. We need new ideas for marketing campaigns. We need new ideas for how we're going to serve our customers. And one of the things that I definitely noticed that was I guess quite valuable for me, having experience when working with creatives, is that creativity in a business setting is quite difficult,
Hmm.
because we are primed to productivity and getting things done and efficiency, and the creative process needs space, and it can feel quite slow and it can feel quite messy, and organizations, sort of teams within sort of more business orientated organizations, it's not that people aren't creative, they need a little bit more support in making the space for creativity and what that
Okay.
brings.
And I would love just to spend a little bit more time digging into that concept, because I think this is something that a lot of leaders are not familiar with. So,
Mm.
for instance, I mean, you mentioned that when you started your career, people that were in that creative category were working with their hands, were creating art and so forth with their, physically. And then bridging into the kind of like the white collar world, and where people are using their minds for this creativity. What did you see and witness as taking change or metamorphosizing between those two groups? What was the difference between you seeing people that are using their hands for creativity versus those in their
Mm.
mind?
That's such a good question. I mean, the thing is that I guess when you're, and I think this is sort of an interesting reflection on my career. Sort of early on in my career, I was working with creatives to help them be more business minded,
Mhm.
and I guess now in my career, I'm working sort of more in the business world to help them bring more creativity. And so I kind of see myself as almost like right in the middle of that. I think probably in my previous career, I think the act of creativity was about producing something quite tangible,
Yeah.
and so when you create something tangible, you can attach a value to it because it's there in front of you. Whereas in the business world, like you say, the creative ideas are a lot more intangible. It's ideas, it's words, it's concepts. And sometimes it's because there's no shape around it, sometimes it's very
Mm.
hard to put as much value on that as a written report
Yes.
or a, presentation, because it's not as tangible. And I think, as I mentioned before, that process of creativity, it's not a linear process. That's what the people that I worked with earlier in my career were much more comfortable with. They were happy to, like, physically, in a very literal way, happy to get their hands dirty, and make things. Whereas when we're in the business world, we kind of want to go from A to B in a very kind of tidy way. And that kind of meandering, making mistakes, failing, having to start again, things not becoming clear until a while, it can feel very, very uncomfortable. And it also takes time. And as we know, we don't have, when we're working in the business world, time, we don't have time. We try and kind of make things as efficient as possible. Creativity is not an efficient process at all.
Right, and it's another thing that I love when I deal with artists and I go consume art, is that that in when an artist creates, it's always perfect, right? It's always,
Mm,
they're creating their vision of what their emotions are and so forth. Now, in the white collar world in business, we have especially leaders. They come to the table and they have a particular thought in their mind or a philosophy that seems to make sense to them based on their past, their bias, and so forth. So in their mind, it is also perfect. But just like the artist that creates something that is tangible, and the leader that has a philosophy that makes sense to them,
mm,
what's really important is what the end user experiences and how it resonates with them, and in either the museum or in the workplace where
yeah.
they're really consuming the content. And so one of the biggest gaps that I find in that with leaders today is that they don't spend time to really test their idea, their concept with the end user to ensure that it makes sense and that it's actually to them tangible, to that end user tangible in solving their problem,
Yeah.
and so forth. And so, do you? In I know the next piece that we want to talk about is kind of the facilitation of
Mm.
this problem solving in the boardroom or wherever it takes place. And so, can you take us into a view of how you facilitate to solve these problems?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting sort of vision, sort of idea, Sam, around the leader that like wants to get things perfect before they present it into the world and they haven't tested it. And I think that's the case for, products and services. And it's also the case for how they lead their team. Like historically, we've kind of, expected leaders, or we thought of leaders as the ones that have all the answers, and, they think behind the scenes and then they share something with their team, and then the team are expected to like deliver on it, because the idea is already there. What I advocate for, particularly within the workshop culture, is not only doing that with kind of products and services, but actually doing that with the culture and how a team works together. A leader definitely sets the environment for, a productive or a positive team culture, but it shouldn't be the leader saying, this is how you need to work. All of the team need to be involved in that. And in order to do that, to get there and get the team involved, that's where we kind of bring in this process of facilitation. So facilitation, on a very sort of tangible, kind of straightforward way of describing it, is a process whereby you're bringing a group of people together and you design a process in order to help them have a productive conversation around what they need to discuss. It's not about, as a facilitator, it's not about you having the content, but it's about you guiding the people that you're working with to help them develop the content and collaborate on that content that they need to create. So you're thinking about what is the end goal that they need to get to, what's the desired end goal, and what are the series of activities or exercises or questions that you're going to ask them from where they are now to where they need to be in order to help them get there.
Sometimes I'd love to get your thoughts on this, because sometimes you'll see a team come together, and then sometimes they don't come together. But so let's talk about each one of those elements. But one is, sometimes they can come together and you kick off on this great conversation and a brainstorming session, and then the time starts running out and you're not getting to your goal. And so maybe if you can talk a little bit about when they do gel and they start going through this brainstorming session, but then you need to bring them back on topic to get the task done.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great when that happens, isn't it? When you sort of just bring a team together and they just kind of spark. And I think that that's what a lot of people imagine good collaboration to be. For me, yes, that can happen, and it's great when it happens. And I think that all collaboration has the potential to be designed. So even in that brainstorming session, again, we kind of imagine brainstorming as this kind of very iterative, off the cuff process where you just get people together. You say, well, we need to get great ideas for this, let's go. Actually, that process needs to be designed as well. It's like, okay, let's think about, what are all the elements that we need to discuss? Do we need to talk about our customer? Do we need to talk about, do we need to generate ideas for products? Do we need to generate ideas for how we're going to market those products? And in what order do we need to do them? What questions are we going to ask in order to help people think differently? Maybe there's some warm-up exercises that you need to do to get people into a different space. And maybe you're thinking about some of the materials that you use. Are you going to get people to sketch and draw? How are you going to break the group up? How are you going to make sure that people that perhaps are more quieter in a group setting are going to be able to speak up and contribute? So a brainstorm is it's become a very generic term for generating ideas, but it's actually a process in itself, a specific process. When Alex Osborne coined the term brainstorming, he had kind of a set of principles, things like, we're going for quantity over quality to start off with, and we build on each other's ideas. And, the facilitator will be there to make sure that those interactions happen.
And then you mentioned those brainstorming piece there, but then you also mentioned that the concept of warming up, and then also to break up. And so let's go into the other side of this, the equation where you mentioned that just to bring people together, and we call, of course, when there's a brand new group, I mean, this calls like an icebreaker and so forth, like that. But if you have a team that is getting ready to go through a task and you need to warm them up, what are the different ways of doing that?
With the brainstorming, I kind of quite like to, an icebreaker that's in the context of what the team are going to be discussing. So if it's something like we need to think about how we're going to make a better client experience, a warm-up exercise might be, okay, let's look over the past year of when we did provide a really good experience to our previous clients. Or it might even be something simple like think about the last experience you had where you felt really looked after, even outside of work, a hotel or travel or a restaurant, and start to kind of generate ideas to get people into the space. So I think icebreakers can be useful. I think we need to use them with caution, because I think if we use methods that bring people out of their comfort zone too early in the process, then we can actually lose them. But I really like icebreaker, some kind of warm-up activity which starts to orientate people towards what they're going to be discussing. Another thing that you can do is also, after sort of some kind of initial introductory exercise, you can also do things like setting ground rules as well. So you could have a conversation as, this is what we're here to do today. We've got some big goals of ideas that we want to create. How are we going to be together for this next hour? What kinds of behaviours do we need to display? What kinds of things do we need to look out for to make sure that we're still staying in a creative space?
Mm-hmm. Great. Now, as we go through that introductory phase and people are warmed up and ready for the task and so forth. Now, when should a facilitator start thinking about, okay, maybe we should break up into smaller groups?
Good question, because I think it's not in the session, it's before the session.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm a big advocate of preparation with a caveat, because we know that when you're facilitating a session, your lovely plan that you've created or your lovely workshop outline may change because of what happens in the room. But ideally, all of those things that you want to happen in the session you would have designed for. So as a facilitator, your role doesn't start when the workshop starts. It starts way before, when you're considering what is it that you need the team to do, and you're actually, as mentioned, designing that process to help get them from A to B. You're thinking about who's going to be there, how long do you have, what are the questions that need to be answered, what are the problems that need to be solved, at what stages are we going to work as a full group, at what stages are we going to work individually, at what stages are we going to break out into smaller groups, when are we going to take breaks? All of those kinds of all of those questions should ideally be answered to some extent before the session. And so, depending on the rhythm and the flow of your session, that's when you decide when it might make sense to break up, or when it might make sense for the whole group to work together.
Now, when there are breakouts, is there any particular science around duration or facilitation of those breakout rooms?
Do you know, that's a really good question. I generally like to keep breakout groups quite short. I read it's actually a book that I have here, Lee Thompson, this one, Creative Conspiracy, The Rules of Breakthrough Collaboration. And in Lee's research, Lee Thompson found that brainstorming is actually most effective up to 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, the quality and the energy of the ideas start to drop off. And so again, depending on the exercise, I think sort of 10 to 15 minutes is a good length of time for brainstorming. And then if you need to then do something else with like synthesis, and that might come after, or feeding back, that might come after. So up to 15 minutes, I think, is usually, it depends, always depends on the kinds of exercise, but up to 15 minutes for kind of a brainstorming exercise, I think works well.
Now, up to this point, we've been talking about workshops and things, working as planned, right? But sometimes things don't work as planned, right? There, you might walk into an environment where things start to fall apart, or are no longer productive, or something that unexpected happens. So in those particular situations, what are the action points that a facilitator should take to ensure that they can either get things back on track,
Mm.
or they can take a pause and maybe regroup. I mean, what are the different things that you would recommend when things start going off track?
Yeah, I think you mentioned one, pausing and regrouping. And I also think it's not a matter of if it happens, it's a matter of when it happens. I don't think I've ever been in a workshop that has gone exactly as I plan it to, minute by minute. And there's always had to be some kind of change. So I think that's one thing. I think there's things that you can do practically in the moment, but as a facilitator, I think one of the most important things that you can do is be comfortable with the fact that things are going to change, and going to be, you might have some unexpected moments. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing that you can do is actually, communicate that to the participants and just say, look, I had this part of the session planned, but it feels like we're going in this direction. What would be most useful to you now? And actually ask the group like where they want to go with their energy. I think as you build your facilitation practice, it's inevitable that you'll start to collect tools and exercises, things that you will have in your back pocket or your toolbox that you might not have necessarily planned into the session, and you'll be able to go through your I guess mental Rolodex or your toolbox of exercises, to help bring things on track, whether it is kind of a quick brainstorming, whether it's a breakout group, whether it's something from liberating structures or any other of these great game storming, any kind of exercise that you might think, okay, this is what the group needs right now. So I think those are the two things, realizing that it will happen. It will happen, developing your mindset so that you start to get more comfortable with the fact that it gets uncomfortable. Knowing that it's okay to pause and regroup. Maybe, if things start to get really hairy, maybe you just say to the group, let's take a break, and you take time for yourself as a facilitator to think about how to bring it back on track. Ask the group, like signal to the group and say, this is what's happening. Where would you like to go now? And then refer to your toolbox.
Okay, great. So really bringing them into involvement. I mean, so there's also a situation, that not that the things just go off track, but then people, at times, could fall into a place where they just suddenly get disengaged, or they're thinking
Yes.
about other things, and or distraction happens. And so is there an opportunity for when you see that disengagement to you go back into like a warm up phase?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, again, you've sort of hit on one of the roles of the facilitator, which is it's not just about taking a group through a set of exercises. It's really about reading the room and understanding, when you see people tuning out or being disengaged, really kind of picking up on those cues. Is it that the group needs an energizer now? Like have those in your back pocket just in case. Do we need an energizer now? Do we need to kind of shift gears? Do we need to get people up and moving around and in different groups? For example, maybe it's just that they need to sit in a different place. So yeah, absolutely keeping an eye on all of those kinds of things.
Okay. So as we've gone through this, now we're going through the session. We started with the introduction. We're getting into the middle of the working session, breakout groups, brainstorming, all those things have happened. And now we're getting to the point where we need to refocus and make some decisions in the group, or to determine what those next steps are. Now, what is the process of refocusing to kind of come to closure?
Yeah, so I think one thing to recognise, and this is something that I have realised, is that you're switching into a completely different mode here. If you're in a brainstorming, ideas generation exercise or brainstorming session, that's divergent thinking, and it is about kind of opening up and possibilities. And when you're starting to come to decisions, it's about convergent thinking. You may go through those cycles many times throughout a workshop, or it may just be one big divergent convergent diamond. So understand that there's going to be sort of an energy switch there. It can be quite difficult, actually, that kind of energy switch. And then think about the tools that will, again, facilitate that process. There's lots of different kinds of, I guess, tools that you can use to sort some of your ideas to start to help you converge. So whether that, I think, is something like a start, stop, continue, or a RACI, or a I really love to use the impact effort matrix. That's kind of one of my favorites. We've got all of these ideas, which are the ones that we're going to, that is going to take the least effort, but is going to have the most impact, whether it's organizing things onto a timeline and then kind of zooming in on the things that you need to do next and having that conversation. There's also something else as well. I actually posted about this recently on LinkedIn, that there is, sometimes and actually this is the topic of my whole book, in that after a workshop there can be that drop off of energy. Like you get to the end and it's all, you've had a really great day, lots of ideas, you've even got your action plan of things that you want to do, but when you get back to your desk the next day, that energy drops off, and there can be sort of a few things that get in the way of between ideas and implementation. And I just wrote a post recently on that. It could be around capacity, which is usually the case. People just have too much to do, and they've been quite ambitious in generating lots of ideas that they just haven't got the resources to deliver on. It could be capability. So it could be, again, ambitious ideas, but do the team have the skills and the knowledge to be able to deliver on them? And then the third one is change. If the ideas that you want to implement involve behavior change within the team, like recognize that can be challenging as well, because it may be unlearning things that you've been doing in the past and relearning and creating new ways of doing things where there will be some friction there. So I think that, as much as you can, if you can have conversations around those barriers at the end of a workshop when you're kind of ready to implement the ideas, and it will make it much easier to kind of transition into making those ideas happen once the workshop ends.
Okay, so let me be clear on this. I mean, so because you mentioned a couple different scenarios, but as what you're saying, as you come to the end of the workshop, it's that you start facilitating or trying to show them or give suggestions on what next steps would be at post workshop, and so what activities should be after that. Now, okay, I'm clear on that piece. Now, what I often find is that that after a workshop takes place and you're complete with that, and especially the ones I've attended myself, if I don't allow myself enough time to digest the material, then it floats away.
Yes.
So do you have a particular recommendation of post workshop activities that an individual should take to ensure that they're getting the best out of the time spent?
Yeah, and this is sort of my idea of workshop culture, but for me, ideally, particularly as a facilitator, this is something to think about before you actually even run the workshop. So this is something that's in the design. In the design of the workshop, you're also thinking, okay, what is it that I want to happen afterwards? And therefore, what do I need to do in the workshop to increase the chances that will happen afterwards as well? So if it is that you want a team to work together on the development of a new experience for their client, then, the workshop may be generating ideas for what that experience looks like. You may get to the end of the workshop and make sure that you allocate some action items, you even perhaps turn it into a project, and maybe, the next time you come together, or you plan for time to come together, which is following up on those actions, or maybe part of the workshop is developing a project committee and agreeing on a project committee and agreeing on your cadence of meetings afterwards. So you're, as a facilitator, you're thinking about all of this hopefully before you run the workshop. And I think this brings me to the idea of kind of workshop culture. So the idea of workshop culture is that in those workshops, that energy that we have, that creativity, the collaboration, the productivity, that's all great and it's needed, and it's very valuable happening in those time boxed periods. And also in the modern organization, we need collaboration as well. And so we don't just want to run these kind of pockets of times when we're collaborative. We want to be collaborative all the time. So what can we learn from workshops and take that into our everyday? So is it the way that we run our meetings? Is it kind of not thinking about, these offsites all the time that we do once a year? Maybe it's doing, something once a month instead that kind of integrates this into our work a little bit more. So I think there's kind of, the workshops in itself, and then there's the whole kind of design of work so that we are generally more collaborative rather than kind of, putting it into this event that we, with a start, middle, and end.
Now, the final thing that I have on the question I have on this piece is that you kind of taken us through the journey of the workshop and then even the post workshop piece there, and I think some of the meetings or follow up meetings after the workshop that you mentioned, and it kind of gets to some of my question. But when we're really trying to determine if the facilitator is really trying to determine if the workshop has legs and is in cause the change that needs to happen in an area, are there certain types of goals or KPIs or things that you're following up on, maybe 3 to 6 months down the road, to ensure that change has occurred and is continuing to take hold?
I guess, yeah. I mean, again, it comes down to sort of what happens before. Like, when you're thinking about the workshop that you're running, like, what are the goals? What is the change? I mean, this is a little trick that I do for myself when I'm designing workshops. I think to myself, okay, by the end of the workshop, we need to have achieved this. But actually, if I think beyond the end of the workshop, what does success look like then? And that's what I'm measuring, And, if I'm facilitating for a client, then I'll ask as a result of this session, imagine this session has gone brilliantly and it's gone exactly the way that you want. What is happening as a result of this session? And then they'll list their objectives. It's okay, that's what we're testing for, that's what we're designing for, and that's what we're following up on after the workshop as well.
So, I've learned so much in my conversation with you today. I mean, one of the things is that I mean, you mentioned the importance, the critical importance of pre-planning and making sure that you have the workshop mapped out, and from not just the start to the end, but beyond,
Yes,
and the results that you're looking for. And then you also mentioned that the importance of having that deep toolbox in place so that you can draw upon things when things don't go the right way. And so I think that's just brilliant, and to ensure that you can adapt on your feet to what's going on, and being able to read the room effectively and so forth, which I think that's a facilitator develops over time. So thank you so much, Alison, with that. Now, is there, I know for our leaders that are listening in, is there any other elements that you think that can help them either select an appropriate facilitator for their project, or help them facilitate themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I would say is that I think facilitation as a leadership skill is only ever going to become more important. And, I think there is those special events, offsites, team offsites, where a leader might want to be engaging in that process. So it makes sense to bring a facilitator in so that the leader can get really involved. And then I'd also say, think about some of the regular meetings that you're having with your team, and where can you bring elements of facilitation into those meetings, because facilitation will help you make those meetings much more engaging, much more collaborative, much more interactive, where everybody can start to contribute and you hear everyone's voice. And that's kind of what we want in teams. I always kind of say that a workshop is almost like a microcosm of a leading a team through kind of uncertainty and chaos. And kind of, let's face it, we're kind of in a phase of lots of uncertainty and chaos. And I feel like, that's continuing, where the amount of change that we're experiencing has definitely increased, and uncertainty. So I think facilitation is a really great skill for leaders to start to cultivate. And I guess you can start to experiment with that in your meetings in a way that feels safe.
And so, for those leaders out there that say, "Well, I need to talk to Alison. I want to learn more about this." Can you tell us a little bit of how they can reach out, the types of organizations you work with, and how you typically engage with your clients?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, Alison Coward. My website is bracketcreative.co.uk. Also, do pick up a book of the Workshop Culture book. You can find that in all good bookstores. And yeah, I mean, we at Bracket, we engage with leaders in many ways. We have a focus on team culture. So we like to help teams diagnose elements of their culture, where there are opportunities and strengths. And then, where there are opportunities, we like to work through programs of activities to help them improve not only their culture, but their ability to facilitate through culture change as well. And that's not just for the leaders, but everyone on the team. So
Great.
workshops, programs, coaching, training, all around this idea of workshop culture and workshop facilitation.
Well, once again, I just want to thank you so much, Alison, for your time today and sharing this with our audience. It's been a great conversation, and I learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks. Really great questions as well. Really enjoyed it.
Great. And so for all you leaders tuning in, we'll see you next week on the People Strategy Forum. And everyone take care. Right. Bye now.